Your sound seems pretty good, so we're all okay.
Got my trusty Jabra voice thing, so it works well.
So good. So we're all ready to rock and roll. Okay, excellent. Okay, so I'm going to kickstart. This first part is going to be the audio, and then we're going to go into the actual recording. We'll be doing both video and audio, but the first publication will be audio, and then it'll turn into video. Okay, so let's get going. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And welcome everyone to our next episode of 100 Days and Beyond, the podcast that's there specifically for individuals who are what we see as the unsung heroes of the deal-making fraternity, the practitioners that make deals work after the deal has been signed and up and running. And today we've got an absolutely brilliant guest. His name is Harrison Tull. He's director at Altius, and he has, according to the profile, which is quite magnificent in terms of its of the background. Harrison, what a background! So let me go through it a bit. We've got a 10 years of experience in operational leadership roles, has demonstrated a track record of driving new business wins, so obviously sales and so on, and having the ability to communicate with people, launching organizations from the ground up, so that's already a big one, restructuring teams, forging mission critical partnerships and alliances, that's again people, and then delivering top line growth and profitability. And if we go into some of the key things, so you focus on enabling private equity growth in EBITDA improvement opportunities, advising private equity and private equity firms and their portfolio companies on operations strategy, SG&A optimization, and large-scale target operating model transformation. And really, there's some great examples. So we've got Senior Manager of Operations Excellence at PwC. I'd love to hear a bit about that, where you redesigned one of the world's largest professional services firms, global IT and HR organizations, collaborating with C-level and senior managers across 21 territories, 157 countries, to generate $220 million in annual savings. I mean, that is magnificent. And then also looking at revamping an 800-person global finance and accounting organization spanning 30 countries for a $20 billion consumer packaged goods company to realize a $60 million annual savings. And you have a number of other examples there as well. And it's a fascinating profile. And clearly you've been in the rough and tumble of it. And Harrison, how did you get into it? Tell us how you landed up being a practitioner in this space and getting involved.
Yeah, Dudley, thanks so much for having me. It's humbling to be here. It's funny. I kind of fell into consulting. I wasn't exactly where I wanted to be when I was going through my college days and my MBA. I thought I wanted to do sports marketing. I grew up playing sports. I played Division I lacrosse in college as well. So I don't know, you always gravitate towards kind of what you're doing. So I thought sports marketing was a nice niche for me. So did all my internships and companies I worked with growing up in the sports marketing arena. And then I had the opportunity to get my MBA because I had an extra year of eligibility to play lacrosse. So I said, yeah, sure, I'll do the MBA, not really knowing, I think, what I was getting into. And then I was all of a sudden exposed to what is this management consulting, strategy consulting kind of a world. And I thought this is exciting and I'd love to try it. So unfortunately, because I had done all my internships with sports marketing firms, I had no shot at getting really into any of the big consulting firms. So that was the goal. Was what are the stepping stones I need to take in order to wind up in a top consulting firm. Took a first job with a startup focused on indirect procurement. We did outsourcing. We had indirect procurement software tool as well as some consulting. Spent a couple of years there in a few different roles. Eventually, I landed in kind of a sales role towards the end, and kind of built the credibility to get into a Price Waterhouse which is where I kind of flourished. So moved to PwC, and then that's where you kind of read there was a lot of the work that we did was in the shared services, outsourcing, global business services type environment. We did a ton of automation towards my last couple of years there as well. All of that really lends itself very well to private equity world, right? In terms of value capture very quickly, and large scale integration, a lot of arbitrage and offshoring in some cases, and then a heavy use of automation where appropriate, right? So then I found myself towards the end of my time at PwC ready to try something new. I had worked with some really brilliant folks that had kind of moved in with PwC to other startups. One in particular, my mentor had started really focusing just on the private equity space, and we had stayed in touch. And in March of 2020, we started talking about maybe we try to go build this to be something a little bit bigger than we had discussed. And so we put together Altius, which he had already kind of founded. We pulled together a team with some folks from ex-PwC, as well as some other folks we worked with, and started building a firm focused on value capture for private equity specifically. And that's all we do. And so we're 2.5 years into our journey. We're growing. We're at I think 30 employees, and we're having a lot of fun with it, and been learning a ton, but using a lot of the skill sets and experiences that I had at PwC now to bring that in full force in private equity.
Just interesting. I think for certain parts of the audience that are potentially in other careers and or even other interests, and coming into something like the M&A world and the private equity world and so on. Do you think that although your journey may have started where you thought that you had a let's call it a few steps behind everyone else, but don't you think that your background in sport and the ability to, I think that whole mental capacity that you build up in a sporting career, the competitive nature, the ability to have the self-discipline, training, going all out, doing the extra mile to get to some sort of level of success in sport. Do you think that's got a correlation to your journey in terms of the successes that you've had?
Yeah, absolutely. I think athletes have a leg up, I think, on the competition in a lot of ways in corporate America, or not America, but in the corporate world. If you think about, I mean, even back when I was in my MBA, right, we took a management course, and I remember thinking like this seems so intuitive, so natural. Some of the things we talk about in leadership and leading teams and core management principles. And then I remember reflecting back and thinking that's because I've been in organized team sports my entire life, and I've seen what a good manager looks like because I've had great coaches, and I've seen what a bad manager looks like. I've seen how to motivate folks, what kind of getting to that one thing that intrinsically drives an individual, and having a coach that can coach both to the individual and to the collective and try to bring together a cohesive group to achieve a goal. So absolutely, I think athletes have a leg up in that regard when it comes to working with others, as well as all the the skills that you learn as an athlete, being able to multitask, being able to be driven towards a single goal, able to work with one another to achieve that goal. There's so much in athletics that translates into the real world that I feel very fortunate that I had that experience, especially to play at the highest level in Division I. You get to play with incredible athletes that are incredibly driven and build around trying to achieve the highest goal possible.
Yeah, especially if you get challenged. I think that's what brings probably the best out in one, and because one can get complacent, and if you are playing at the highest possible level, there's always someone better than you, or someone that at your level that's pushing you just to inch up a little higher. And I think there's a massive value in that. But there's also an element I want to sort of link back into your current role, which I think is quite important. That's the ability. I think there's there's the technical skill of doing the actual sport, but there's also the EQ, the people side, because essentially the team is made up of highly motivated individuals in any case. And now you're taking a high performance people and you're trying to get them all working in the same direction. And they might have very strong opinions. They might have very different training backgrounds, and now you're trying to bring them all together into one united sort of team that operates and acts out a particular strategy. I just want to sort of delve a little deep in that, and maybe you could relate it to one or two of the projects, how you see some of that sort of came about.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess I saw it more at PwC because we had larger teams that we're working on. Right now, within the work we're doing on Altius, our teams are small. We're 3 to 5, unless we're doing a big carve out. But some of the more strategic work or the value capture work is pretty small teams, seasoned folks that have been doing this for a long time. I think in my PwC days, that's where the ability to try to think about, you've got a range of folks across the team, right? You've got a first-year analyst, you've got, you know, a 15-year director and partner, and then everyone in between. And as a manager or a senior manager, you're sitting there trying to just be the glue and hold it all together, which is, I think, one of the more difficult roles you have in consulting, trying to be that delivery senior manager, right? Where you're trying to bring along the new folks and teach them the skills, and it can be a little bit frustrating because you're supposed to rely on them to run the business case, or, you know, to do the data collection and to have it in the right format. And gosh, it's you know, all the technical things that you need to have, but also trying to develop the folks, you know, in terms of how they deal with internal and external stakeholders, how they understand to present in front of clients, when is the right time to present in front of clients, you know, is always a big one. But I think for us, which was great for me at PwC, is one of my mentors there always remember that age is just a number, and so would put us in front of the client extremely early in our process and have us own things that I think a lot of teams weren't. And it, you grow, right? As an athlete, you learn from failure in the same way you do in the corporate world. So I think, you know, getting our folks exposed, you know, to the highest level conversations as early as possible, and getting them to own a key deliverable, something that translated from athletic days as well. Is, you know, you have to have a freshman that steps up in that spot when a senior gets hurt. So I think it, you know, a lot of it translates there.
Yeah, and I imagine it's you also build a culture of a certain type, and in teams, and, you know, in sports teams as well as in business teams, whether they're small or big, you have you build a, this is the way we do it here, this is the way, you know, the Altius way, you know, and you build some level of a set of values, and you also have a sort of a common thread that runs along the people that you select as well to join your team. You know, you only want certain attributes. So let's look at that, because you're also busy building up a business. You have been part of big businesses, and maybe just summarize, maybe for us, what do you see as the attributes of a really good, you know, integration person, a person that's sort of fills those shoes. What are some of the attributes that sort of stand out for you?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because we always talk about the specialist versus generalist, you know, attributes, right? I find myself to be a more of a generalist, although I think we've got, you know, across our team, but within what I've done specifically, it's really around, you know, mid and back office operations, and specific to global business services. But I think that lends itself nicely to solving a lot of different problems across the organization. So I think what I've found as being a generalist is really helped me, because I think that allows me to move across, you know, functions within the organization, across problems, and just to be kind of that problem solver. And I can give plenty of examples of, you know, where we go into a client thinking that we're going to, you know, solve one problem, and then another one pops up, and that's where we go full force on it. And there's a lot of examples, and I think that's probably the other one, is the ability to pivot, right? So how quickly can you, you know, move on to a new problem? Can you identify other problems, or maybe you know, the right priority of problem sets to go after? So I think that's a big one. And then obviously we're under tight timelines. So I think folks that deal with pretty intense pressure. The PE guys are I find out a little bit different than some of the clients I dealt with when I was at PwC. Timelines are cut in half if you're lucky. And you're dealing with a lot of complexities. You're dealing with shortage of data in a lot of ways. You have to be okay with not knowing the full picture, but making the right assumptions and moving forward. And I think that can be pretty stressful. So I think those that have thick skin as well is another thing. I mean, you think about we deal with. Got some, very high pressure, high powerful individuals that want to move to a closure very quickly. And so I think having thick skin's a huge one as well. And then, all the technical skills that come with it as well, right? I mean, obviously you're dealing in Excel and other tools quite a bit. And I think, being on a couple of projects, all of a sudden you realize how to get to something much quicker. What are the templates you can use that are going to accelerate this project from using it on a previous one. And then I think the last thing would probably be, like you mentioned, the EQ is huge. I think executive presence, particularly in this arena, is so important. Being able to quickly and confidently, concisely communicate. Like I said, there's not a lot of time. So, very quickly being able to get to, what is the problem we're solving? What is the value we're capturing? What is the one-time investment or the ongoing? Being able to get that down on a page very quickly, be able to explain what assumptions are going into that and being able to defend it. And then understanding, what feedback you're getting and how the individuals, the stakeholders you're working with, are responding. It takes a lot. And then on the other side is just dealing with those everyday day-to-day managers, right, or directors that are working within the company you're working with, and it can be a very hostile environment. I've come into some very difficult environments because they know kind of the writing's on the wall in some regards, or people know that they're going to have to cut their team size, to hit a number, or they're going to have to move more to a lower cost center, or they're going to have to automate, or big problems for directors and managers. And trying to build a bridge, say, I understand you, I'm here to try to co-create a solution with you, can be very difficult. But I've built some really great relationships with clients as a result of trying to put myself in their shoes and say, let's come up with the best solution we can. And oftentimes those people are the ones that get promoted as well. So trying to let them know, like, hey, look, if we could do this thing right, this could be a really great path for you. And I've they've got countless stories of clients that have really moved into excellent roles as a result of kind of leading an integration or divestiture. So anyway, there's a lot of skill sets, but I think those would probably be some of the few I'd think about.
Fantastic. I mean, Harris, I think you summarized it incredibly well. I want to sort of pick on a few of those elements. I think one of the key things where I would like to start is when you're working in a sort of corporate environment, you end up having a certain method, or let's say methodology and attitude towards an acquisition and integration, et cetera, and there's potentially more of a let's say it's normal working hours, the normal working process. You arrive, you've got a project, you're busy with it, you have a report, feedback, et cetera.
Yeah.
And then if you look at the private equity world, which is everything is time driven, results driven, and at the end of the day, everyone's looking, not everyone, but the PE firms especially, are looking at the value creation, the synergy capture, all those fancy terms, which are key terms, and I subscribe to them massively. So value creation, synergy capture, all that type of thing. But the driver is EBITDA, right? So and then and EBITDA as quick as possible, EBITDA growth as quick as possible, because they are looking to take on one or two platform businesses, and then sort of tuck in and consolidate and do it within a time span of the fund that they've got available.
Yeah.
because they've got to exit as quick as possible. So you're not just thinking about integration, but you're also thinking about how do you prepare for assisting the PE firm to get ready for exit. I know that's probably the last thing on everyone's minds at that stage, but you almost have to think so far ahead and say, okay, it's all part of the value creation, but value creation doesn't just happen during integration. It happens, value creation often happens and is only seen at exit for PE firms, where with corporates, often it could be a tuck-in, it could be even a separation or a divestiture, where, you know, it's more about the strategy and rolling out sort of improvements and so on. So the attitude is different. So I've sort of outlined it, but I'd like more of your experience around sort of give us the polarity, if you like, the difference between those two drivers and how that influences you and your day-to-day work.
Yeah, well, I mean, everyone we've come into the last couple of years, right? I mean, the prioritization is around, we're here for 3 years max. So let's maximize value creation as fast as possible. We were working on a project when I first moved over to Altius with a large PR and content distribution company. And we went in thinking that we were going to pull the typical levers, which would be indirect procurement, HR, IT, finance and accounting, right? Those are kind of the main ones you look to say, okay, we've got massive savings that we can find very, very quickly. And in a couple of days of workshop conversations with the COO, we started realizing, wait, their content distribution side really has some of the most upside potential in terms of consolidation, potentially outsourcing or offshoring. And once we started to realize and dig under the covers, you realize that there were just an amalgamation of multiple companies that they'd acquired over the last 5-6 years. And each country was running their own process, had different products that they were selling, different price points, and all doing it at a different cost, right? And so we realized we could really leverage some lower cost areas. And so we pivoted and we went down and we said, if this is going to be a 3 or 4 year hold for this private equity, the biggest value we can create is around this content distribution side. So we put aside some of the bigger areas that we know we'd go after usually, or they're bigger typically, but not in this case. And we focused on content distribution, which is a brand new function for us to go after. And we're talking, this is front office, this is the touching customers, this is the actual product that's getting delivered to customers, and trying to understand from there, going through the exercise of what is strategic, what is real intellectual property, what is ability to put into a more consolidated shared service type environment, what are we comfortable outsourcing if we were to do that. And it led to a massive 120 million 5-year deal for an outsourcer, a lot of consolidation into kind of 2 areas, India and Portugal. And then once we had that in place, then we went back and we looked at finance and accounting. We looked at indirect procurement. We looked at IT infrastructure and product development and started to put those. But again, those were kind of the secondary priorities after we went through the first. So I think that's one of the big ones, is kind of saying, what's your time horizon? How quickly can we get certain functions and other priorities aligned, and then what is the value that each one's driving, and then being able to prioritize around that was key.
Because sometimes the attitude is how do we cut the costs as quick as possible, because that's the only synergy we can achieve. But in fact there's often just if you look at the business from a strategic point of view and you say, okay, if we have a value creation mindset, what are the business opportunities that were hidden during the deal making process, the due diligence that happened? Because the guys that are doing that, and whether you're involved in that or not, but most of the time the deal making team are all about paying the lowest amount of money for the asset, trying to almost apply a recipe in terms of how do we sort of pay the least amount of money, cut the costs the quickest amount of time, bring these assets together, and in that way, exit as soon as possible by having increased EBITDA by doing a few moving pieces on the chessboard. Then you go in as an integrator, and then you realize, but wait a minute. In fact, they were thinking they're going to exit at, at a certain value, but by just tweaking the levers, and you calling it pivoting, but just by leveraging things that you realize during the integration process, you're probably creating even far more value than what they even had realized during the deal making process. And that I find incredibly fascinating. And I think a lot of the audience that are listening, that are deal makers and are not necessarily integrators, can potentially say, okay, at what point do we bring integrators into our deal making process to potentially start looking at maybe there's other opportunity for us that we can go and get the value creation. Maybe our approach shouldn't be a cost cutting, cost cut, jam it together, package it, and move on within that, let's say, the 3-year time horizon. Because often it takes a PE firm, for instance, at least 1 or 2, 3 years to get going once they've raised their money, their fund. And if their fund's a 10-year process, at where they need to exit, they've already consumed 2, 3, 4 years. By the time the acquisition has happened, that means their runway is starting to get shorter and shorter and shorter. And guess who gets that kind of pressure? It's the integration team needs to perform, because it's now become a superficial type of pressure. Just tell us a little bit about that, your experience around that.
Yeah, and I think you'd probably want to separate growth and buyout funds, thinking about what the prioritization is going to be around cost cutting versus being ready to acquire more, as you're saying, on the growth side. But I think getting involved as an integrator as far upstream as possible has, like you mentioned, some of the most value that can be created from it, because you're starting to bring in an outside perspective, and the folks that are actually going to be on the ground doing the work. Getting them involved a little bit sooner in the process always works. I think getting involved even before deal close, looking at the original due diligence, the 5-10 day kind of quick and dirty due diligence, but having the right benchmarking and the right teams that have been in place. And then when you do the confirmatory diligence, obviously having the right integrator, I think, or folks with deep integration expertise that can really build the playbook and have that go into the deal value is huge. And my last deal that I worked on was with one of the world's largest IT distribution companies, and we started getting involved pre-close. It was one of the first for me within the work that we've been doing in Altius, getting involved, with them very early on. And you start to realize, what the bankers told us in terms of what the actual, value capture looked like and what we're actually seeing on the ground. There's some differences, to put it nicely. And I think what you then have to do is, again, the pivot or move to a new lever or whatever it is. You need to, the number is the number, right? We're going to go find that value, whether it's in that function or if it sits outside. And then you start to think about where else can we look. I mean, with that IT distribution company I mentioned, looking at SKU rationalization, I think drove way more value than they had ever dreamed. And some of the work that we thought we'd do within their global business services for finance, for example, they're actually a pretty mature organization. And so we were able to not only do the due diligence to understand where the opportunity was, but also we did maturity assessments, understood where the capability sits today. What is real in terms of what can be moved out of country, or how mature are processes within country today, and you start to build a much better picture in terms of where can we actually drive real savings that we can book towards the playbook number we put up ahead of time. So the more we can get involved up front, and that's what we keep telling clients is if we can pull this in for that, even the earliest on due diligence, just to look at operational performance, looking at the right benchmarking, help build out the story and financials, and any part of that confirmatory as well. That's huge, because if we're going to be the ones integrating, we would kind of want to know. We want to lift up the covers and kind of know what's underneath there, and where we can go after and prioritize.
That's brilliant. So I want to Just go into that the word you mentioned a number of times in the earlier part, and the importance of mentors. In your journey, because you mentioned that a few times. Is that important? What does a mentor do? What's the best value that you get out of a mentor? How did you find the mentors? Just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, mentors are huge. I had two really great mentors at PwC, and I was very lucky that I kind of just we fell into a good friendship, a good working relationship very early on. And one was the original director that had hired me, who's now my business partner. And so we've known each other for, I guess, 8 or 9 years now, and been working together very closely. And we worked on almost every project together. And then another director I had worked with, who was one of my first few managers, who is just one of the most brilliant guys I've met, and I kind of just followed both of their coattails in terms of, at PwC, both, because they'll vouch for you in the right leadership discussions that you're not in, but also put you on the right projects and give you those opportunities to really shine and to push yourself. I had I think one of my most trying projects I was on at PwC was we were doing the Walgreens. Sorry, not Walgreens, Abbott Laboratories and St. Jude Medical integration, which is a huge acquisition, and I think it was 2016, 2017. And we had our manager leave the firm, and I was a senior associate at the time, and my mentor, who was also the director on the project, took me to dinner, and he said, "I think something's going to happen, and I need you to step into a role. I think you're ready for it. And if not, I will bring in whoever you need in order to support you. But I think you can do this." And I took over managing that project, and we were there for a year with Abbott. We had an unbelievable relationship with our stakeholder there. We did some really cool things, from, location analysis and flying down to Costa Rica and Mexico, and trying to build out what it would look like in terms of consolidating, those two businesses that had very strong global business services capabilities already, and very different technology environments as well. So it was very complicated and complex, but we had a great time doing it. So having a mentor that has a lot of faith in you and puts you in those spots to learn and to grow was huge. And then I think for myself, outside of just my immediate folks that I've worked with, for me, I've really spent, especially the last few years, trying to grow out what I call my own board of directors. Right. So folks that I've worked with, or that I have in my network, and try to build out, like, who is this person to me, in terms of, can they help me advance my career? Are they in a completely different career in which just good advice? Are they retired folks that, have seen it all, and I can, kind of lean on to say, here's what I'm thinking about something. And so I've kind of been building out a board of directors for myself the last few years, and kind of figuring out, how do I stay in touch with these folks? And it's not, transactional in that way. I think, I really enjoy the conversations with those people as well. But there's so many great people out there that, I've met, or that I've worked with, that can give great advice. And even if they don't work within your specific industry, a lot of things, are crossover between, jobs and industries. So that's been a huge thing for me as well, is trying to groom that network of folks so I can tap into them, when I have needs as well.
And I imagine it's at some stage you'll probably already doing it, bringing youngsters in through the process, and handing over the baton in terms of also doing your own mentoring. I'm guessing, I don't know if you've started, but that transition from being mentored into becoming a mentor, I think is also quite an interesting journey. And I think it's a personal growth journey as well, where you start passing on a lot of your own knowledge. You actually only realize how much you know and have experienced when you start mentoring someone else. I think it's a totally different thing. Tell us, have you ever experienced that?
Oh yeah, I mean, I got a great opportunity at PwC to mentor some really smart folks. That was one of my favorite things. I think I lost when we started a consulting firm, where, all of a sudden I'm the associate, the manager, the director, and everything in between, on a project because we're trying to bootstrap and move quickly. At PwC, I had a great opportunity to mentor a few folks, whether it was direct mentor relationship, which I had a few folks into what they call it PwC. It's called coaching, right? So you have your coach, and then you have your partner, and then you have a relationship partner. So you kind of have three that are very set in terms of how you your career pathing and who you work with. But I loved the coaching aspect. It was one of my favorite things. I had two really great girls that were my direct, coachees, and I think sometimes we talk almost every day, particularly when you're getting towards like year end, when performance reviews are going in and you're trying to position them in the right way. But I got to work on some really great projects as well with large teams. The one that you mentioned at the beginning of the call was probably the largest project I've ever done. That was internal to BWC. So we were doing global business services stand-up, which was massive. If you think about 21 territories, 127 countries or whatever it was, all do their own IT, their own HR. The only thing they share is that they're in this partnership network, right? And the branding that goes with that and paying into it. But the services being delivered are entirely separate. And then they do that for good reason, for tax purposes. And but we wanted to try to build a partner network that could provide those exact same services. So we had a huge team in order to do that. And we had a lot of the young folks on that team as well. So it was really fun, for me getting to coach. And that was kind of one of the first big projects I got to run as a senior manager, where I had multiple work streams, multiple associates and senior associates, and all trying to bring together this massive problem to solve. And that was really fun for me. So absolutely, I'd like to do it more. I think the last couple of years I've had my head down, trying to just grow this business and make sure that we delight customers with what we're doing. But that more and more we're trying to pull in young talent. But it's tough. It's a tough balance between getting young talent in, but they don't have necessarily the skills or the experience that we need. So first you got to kind of build the experience set.
Build a technical skill and so on
Exactly.
and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah. But we've got a group of interns that we've brought in for this summer, which is great. So I think they're getting up to speed quickly. So yeah.
I notice a lot of, I mean, you did talk about generalist versus specialist, etc. And there's different types. So you've got, in my mind, you've got specialist in terms of, or in generalist in terms of, let's call it leadership and the management side of things. So it's project management, and it's managing the various work streams. And then you can also have generalists and specialists in terms of the actual technical skills involved. So there are people that are able to work cross work stream, maybe able to build different financial models and impact across different work streams, but they might not be specific work stream people. But then you get other people that are maybe just really brilliant at the IT side of things, or really good at the marketing and sales, or really good at the HR, or whatever the work streams are. Just give us your definition of what do you mean by a specialist versus generalist? And are you talking industry? Are you talking, because there's a number of places you can apply generalist versus specialist. Give me some ideas around that.
That's a good point. So I think when I think of specialists, I think the deep technical expertise in a given function. I mean, we have IT specialists that I work with within our group at Altius that can go to the level 3 of any IT process. They've seen it all, they've done it all, and they can talk the talk. So when I think about specialists, I think about folks that sit within function-specific specialties that have either worked in that capacity or that's all that they've done. Cybersecurity, IT infrastructure, product development, or in the finance side, the folks that can get down to the, not just talking about what your close process looks like, but knowing, the individual processes that you're doing, who's involved. They know the right systems landscape as well. So when I think of myself, I consider myself more of a generalist in the sense that I've been lucky. At least what I would consider lucky is I got to be across multiple industries at PwC and now within the work that we're doing at Altius. I've got to work in multiple functions, usually mid and back office, so heavily within finance and accounting and IT and HR and indirect procurement, obviously. But I get to kind of move between those kind of seamlessly and pull in the right expertise or the right experts to drive that. So that's what I would think about generalist versus specialist.
Yeah. So let's get to. I mean, we got about 15 odd minutes left, and I want to spend a little bit more time talking around some of your personal experiences, some maybe one or two examples, a few, let's call it golden nuggets you want to share, things that you thought were incredibly valuable, maybe values, I don't know, whatever it is that's important to you. Take a few minutes, just sort of share a few ideas around that, and then after that, I want to get into the actual company Altius and what you're trying to achieve there, and then we'll get into a bit of personal stuff. So let's start with some examples and some sort of golden nuggets, if you like.
Yeah. Let's see. I guess we can start with, I mean, some of the work we've done the last couple of years, probably a good example. So I mentioned recently worked with an IT distribution company. That was a massive deal. I think the largest private equity firm had done in terms of total entity size. We're talking about a $50 billion IT distribution company, which is pretty large for them. I think the couple of interesting nuggets to take away from there. One would be the difference I've seen in terms of what types of pressure a private equity will put on the management and on expectations based on how that company's doing, right? If they're a growing company like this one was, 20% or 26%, year over year revenue growth. They've got 3 years of backlog for IT. They've got customers that are paying. They trying to tell them, hey, that you need to cut, X%, for your bottom line, has a much different conversation than a company that's really struggling in terms of revenue growth, top line growth, or even the ability to cut costs. So that was one I saw, and I think it was interesting to see the dance between the PE firm and management. Was a much different one than I'd seen in some other deals that I've worked on. That being said, I think we did some really interesting things. And I think a great example of, again, going back to that pivot word that I mentioned earlier, one of the areas that we looked at, I guess we had two major pivots. One was a little bit smaller and the other was quite large, but on the smaller side, we had looked at the order to cash process, particularly around credit operations, collections with that client. And we had thought that there was a large opportunity to move a lot of that work into some of their lower cost areas. They had Sofia, Bulgaria, and Manila, Philippines, and thought we could leverage this a lot more. And talking with a lot of the CFOs of those countries, understood that the real issue was around systems, and they really didn't know what they didn't know because they were dealing with this patchwork of kind of homegrown systems that each country was doing differently. And there was no one view on who's doing what, and so very quickly we pivoted to, okay, well, let's put in a collections and credit operations tool. We went with High Radius at the time, which is a great tool, and I think we'll see the value that drives. But trying to move our business case then towards more automation and reducing DSO, which had, in terms of interest rates, had a pretty large working capital improvement as well, which wasn't what we had originally thought we were going to go after. And then once we've got the tool in place, in a year's time, I think then we'll have the data and we'll be able to say what other work can we move then to a lower cost area, or perhaps they'll just be with better systems, be able to redeploy folks in terms of other value added roles. So that was a big one. I think we learned there was being able to pivot very quickly on, is it a tool or a process or people type problem. The other one there, I think, was they're on this massive digital journey, right? They brought in this high powered, really cool chief digital officer, and they're trying to redefine everything about how the customer interacts with their company, how the internal folks interact with one another, and then all of the third parties, right? As a distributor, they're dealing with all these tech companies that they're distributing their products for. So that entire ecosystem of customers and partners and internal folks, and building this entire digital platform around it is crazy. It's a huge undertaking. But what it did was it reprioritized almost everything that we looked at in terms of value capture, because that's going to start, if that's in the right place, then the amount of value that you can drive with that, both internally and externally, is massive. Top line growth is huge, but even in terms of the way that people do their work today, if all of a sudden quotes are generated from a system and not manually generated, then what are your quote makers doing, right? So, and that's a very specific example, but extrapolate that everywhere, right? So the digital strategy completely redefined everything we looked at, and trying to pull whole parties onto the same page in order to achieve something was very difficult, to say the least. But I think that's just an example of, you go in thinking one thing, and then something very quickly changes, and you just got to figure out how do we solve this problem, and how do we pull everyone together towards again the single goal.
It would appear that the technology and systems and processes and all that has a massive impact on the success of an integration, and it seems to be that technology has infiltrated pretty much every part of a business these days.
Yeah.
There was a time 20 years ago where technology was only applied by certain divisions, like the finance department. They always generally had some kind of ERP or bookkeeping or something like that, or the manufacturing would have some sort of stock and sort of production planning. But there are a lot of the departments, operations wise, didn't really have tech. Now it's bringing everything together, and then you also have this problem where when companies, especially ones when you're trying to bring them together, you're all these disparate systems that are already, many of them are systems upon systems. It's these ecosystems of let's call it a spaghetti ball, if you like, of stuff. And it sounds to me like one of the biggest challenges for when you get involved with clients is trying to bring some kind of sanity to that environment. Is that a fair assumption?
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, the IT landscape, particularly with companies that have been acquiring like crazy and haven't done a lot of integration, and all of a sudden they get bought and say, all right, let's solve this integration problem. It's massive. Both from a cost standpoint, there's also obviously some costs that can be reduced if you rationalize or consolidate that IT application landscape. But there's a huge amount of man hours that go into it, and cost on IT side to get those systems stood up. I mean, it's huge. One of the things we looked at with this last IT distribution company going in was all the work that had been pulled in from the different countries into their global business service centers, right? There was no harmonization across what tools they were using. So the person that's sitting next to someone in Manila that's working for the India group versus for North America are doing the exact same process on two entirely different systems. So imagine like the ability to harmonize was huge, but it took a whole lot of time. And it's going to be something that I work on for the next 2 years, trying to understand, how do we get what is the right process? What is that blueprint process, if you want? That's what the word we used there was. But and what is the right system to be on, right? Is it a system we don't have today? Is it a system that they're using in Germany that we need to explore? There's a lot of that goes on. So one of the first things we did in terms of understanding the current maturity of the organization and kind of how things worked was doing what is capturing that full IT landscape. And what processes are using which systems or which applications. And then even more so is on the carve-out side, right? So one of the things we're doing right now is on the chemical side. We're doing a large chemical carve-out, focusing on consulting on the IT specific portion of it. And that's 500 plus applications globally across, I think, 37 countries, right? And now trying to figure out, what application needs to stay with which company? Are they both using it? It's not all going to be tied up nicely in the TSA going forward. So trying to figure out how that works going forward, and who supports each application. Yeah, the IT environment just adds so much complexity. And I remember when I was in my MBA class, we had a great IT professor, and one of the things we talked about was, I remember we read an article called "IT Doesn't Matter," and the whole idea was, right? I mean, an older article, but is IT really just is it a value generating or a key component of an organization, or is it just help keep the lights on? And I think now we've realized, even in the digital era, even more so, IT is so pivotal to company success. And one of the first things you have to get right. And I think that's when we talked about getting up, part of the due diligence up front, getting that IT lens right away, and understand, because there's so much more that can go wrong on the IT side, particularly because companies don't invest a whole lot in IT. If it's not broke, you don't fix it, right? And there's so much of that. Systems that are sitting on COBOL still today, and they've got 2 programmers sitting in Milwaukee that are, a year away from retirement, that hold the thing together with bubblegum and shoestring. And it's crazy to see some of the environments you get into, because it's a massive investment to move to a new ERP or any type of application, right? So
Yeah, so I want to expand on that. I mean, from my experience, I mean, you get one issue is you get pushback from users, especially multi-language, multicultural, because certain legislation in certain countries require reporting in certain ways. They also have certain things of where's the data kept. Can it be done? Must it be done within the country, or is it kept outside? So you've got all these data protection regulations. So you get user pushback, you get regulatory issues around your IT systems. And then in addition to that we've seen in our experiences, you might have an SAP or one of these big ERP systems implemented, but it could be the identical software, but they've been implemented completely differently in 6, 7, 8 locations. So you might be paying the same license fee to the same software vendor, but the implementations are so disparate that sometimes you literally have to start again using the same software. You almost have to re-implement the same software across everything because of the multiple implementations, because everyone had their own implementation team. They got local regulation, they got local users and local systems and processes. So there's that dimension to it as well. So I mean, tell us a bit about that. I'm sure you've seen some of that.
Yeah, it's always a huge problem, right? You see so many different people using the same system differently. That happens quite a bit. I think the latest example I could give, which we'll see where we actually get, but our going in hypothesis is that on the collection side, and the one I mentioned earlier with high radius, in the collection side, is that we can move to a blueprint process that everyone can at least get on board. There's going to be some country nuances. There's language dependencies, obviously, and you kind of work towards those towards the end. But the idea is that you want to have, as much as possible, a single process that is being replicated across, in this case, it was 13 countries we had in scope there. And the only way that you get to value quickly and to something implemented in a very tight timeline, right? I mean, we started in April this year. We want that thing to be, go live in October, or end of September, really. So we're not dealing with any of the Q4, shutdowns within IT. So trying to get everyone around a single process is entirely impossible, right? I mean, Germany wants to do it different. The US, they have good reason to do it. And even getting us all to sign up to one tool was a pretty hard process. That was something they had been working on for 18 months. Everyone knew we needed a new collections tool, but no one wanted to agree to what tool it was. And so trying to get everyone in the room to say, all right, what are the tools we're looking at?
Mediator, negotiator, you're a translator,
Yeah, I remember. I mean, that's probably one of my biggest success stories, I think, for me individually, because I kind of took that on. I saw this was a problem that needed to be solved, and I said I'm going to focus on this within this organization. And as I was leaving, some of the stakeholders I worked with, guy who runs the overall O2C process within North America, he said there's no way we could have gotten this done, without you kind of pulling us all together and saying we need to make a decision going forward. And trying to
commit, just commit.
And getting committed.
Doesn't matter. Let's just commit. Let's just get going.
It's so hard in these large organizations that have, but you've got collectors that have been there for 28, 30 years doing the same process. They like the way it works today. They don't want to change things. And yeah, it's a huge issue, but one that needs to be solved.
Yeah, I mean, you and I could probably, and I would love to bring you on to another episode. We probably could speak forever, you and me. And I mean, we didn't even touch on the data aspect, because when you're doing a carve out is who owns what data, what parts of it are transferred to this entity, to that one. And if you're bringing entities together, often the data migration or the data consolidation, they're in different formats, and they could be partial, and there could be gaps in the data, and so there's a whole data cleansing process before you can even do migration. I mean, we haven't even got to those topics yet, and we'll get to them hopefully at another occasion if you're open to coming onto the show again, Harrison. I want to go quickly now into the just sort of change directions and go into, tell us about Altius. Tell us about the value proposition. You've been going for about 2.5 years. Yeah. What is your goal? What's your aim? What's your sort of vision for the organization? Where are you going? What do you present? What are you offering to the to the world out there?
Yeah, no. So I mean, it's really the brainchild of my business partner, Rajiv Arjun. So he was my mentor at PwC, and I think he sits within the Silicon Valley world. So a lot of the stuff he worked on was high tech. We did at PwC, we did private equity work, but also did IPO readiness. We did a lot of VC-backed groups or companies as well. So I think he started to kind of build a hypothesis around having a consulting group that focuses on private equity specifically and has deep expertise, understands what intrinsically motivates private equity and portfolio companies. One of the companies that we're working with right now is a healthcare company. And we were told that we won that deal because we came in and they knew two things. One is that we had deep expertise in operations, and two, that we were private equity focused. And when we went in and we talked about timelines with them, we talked about a 12, maybe 15-month timeline, because we know we're towards the end of their holding period. Whereas Accenture came in and talked about a 3 to 5 year timeline, right? And they're thinking 5 years, we could be two owners down the road in 5 years. So you don't understand our company. So that was the hypothesis, and it worked out pretty well so far in terms of and it's really been relationship based. I mean, it's such a small, as network of folks that run these private equity groups, right? And so these operating partners know each other. They like, to go back to if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I mean, if they work with a consulting group or even an individual contributor that works in integrations or M&A work, and they do good work, they will continue to put them on to their next project, because they know that program will be successful. And so that's been our biggest thing, is we're private equity focused. We have deep expertise across operations, and we get the work done. And we have delighted customers that we've really done a lot of great work for, and we want to continue to do that. And really we focus around 3 areas, right? It's the due diligence and standalone analysis, right? We do acquisition, divestiture, post-close, and then we do post-close value capture, right? So anywhere that we can get involved, but the sooner the better, from our point of view, because we'd like to be able to drive, what that value is that is being determined up front. And then, from there, we do a lot of work, like on the post-value capture, it's the build or buy decision, right? A lot of it, I think, in terms of, prediction or the way that we're moving forward, a lot of it's been buy. I think there's been not a lot of appetite for building, shared service organizations or low cost centers. I think that's something that we did a lot in the early 2000s, and now it's I think there's a lot less appetite, especially on PE. You want to be able to move quickly, and a third party can get you there very quickly, right? So we bring in a large set of a network of third parties, both kind of the niche third parties that do, say, just IT product development, or large, firms that can do the full stack of functions and help kind of move through that process. Yeah.
That's yeah, because I mean, even in your name, it's Altius Strategic Consulting. So really, you become a strategic partner for private equity firms. You've sort of zoned in on a niche, if you like, and you've built out a solution for that niche that you can repeat again and again, and also just in terms of your value prop, the three levels of service that you offer. So I think that's excellent, and that's great. So for anyone in the audience wanting to get hold of Harrison, this is probably the right kind of, and you're in private equity, this is probably the right kind of person to talk to. And I just want to just quickly go onto the personal side before we wrap up.
Yeah.
Look, this is a rough and tumble world, and often the hours are long, and it could take its toll on things like your family, your health, your just normal friendships, and so on and so forth. And obviously, in your world, where you are right now, I mean, as you said earlier in the conversation, is you got head down, you got a relatively new organization, you got some really good customers, and they're demanding a lot of your time and energy and focus and effort. How do you balance it all? I mean, how do you keep yourself sane and focused and just on the, in the right sort of mental state to do your work?
That's a great question. I think it's funny. I haven't told a lot of people this, but so I'm a recent transplant to London, right? I moved from New York. I was in New York a long time. My fiance was transferred to London for work. It's actually awesome for me because a lot of our customers at the moment have been North America focused. We've got a couple in Switzerland that we're working with now, but so that frees up my morning, and I can take my mornings to do whatever I want. If I need to catch up on on things, I can do that. But if I want to enjoy a nice morning or work out or kind of prepare or do something else, I have at least a few hours in the morning that I have to myself where no one's calling me generally, which is great. But personally, no, I think the biggest thing for me is finding a good schedule. I've really got into triathlons last year, so I've got a couple of the things on the wall there for triathlon medals. But I think for me, it's finding a good balance for working out is huge for me. I've got my bike in here as well, so trying to if I get 30 minutes between calls, just jumping on the bike. But no, I think that's the biggest thing for me is trying to make sure I can carve out personal time. And I think the biggest thing also, one of the things going in hypothesis about Altius was that we can work from anywhere, and then we can work at any time, any time zone. So if you look at our team, we're everywhere. We're completely distributed across all the U.S. We've got me here in London. We've got folks in India. We can work at any time, and which is a great thing. It's a blessing and a curse in some ways because if a client wants something, someone's going to be up. With the infamous night shift, that we're all working on at some point. And I have some pretty late calls, obviously being in London for clients that are in the US. But yeah, for me, it's just carving out that time for myself, but the flexibility that I've got that, since we started this firm and being able to kind of carve that time out whenever it is during the day, is huge for me. And I think that allows me to pursue other, things like triathlons or what have you. So yeah, I think that's how I stay mentally, stable.
Yeah, so there's definitely a decent balance, and I think that probably comes back from your sporting career, knowing that you have to have that, to have a clear mind, you have to have a strong and healthy, body and also a mental, emotional side of things as well. Harrison, we're at the end of the show. Thank you very, very much. We could probably speak for hours. Absolutely thoroughly enjoyed your input, and thank you for sharing everything that you have. Please come back to us on the show. I mean, let's see how it goes the next 6 to 12 months, what the Altius journey is. And for anyone listening today, if you'd like to get hold of Harrison Tull, Director of Altius Strategic Consulting, new website up and running earlier this week. Please go onto the website, have a Google, have a look. but you'll probably find Harrison on LinkedIn. And I'm sure are you okay with anyone reaching out, Harrison?
Oh yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, and check out the website. It's altius.us. You can see the full leadership team we've got there, and we've got some really great case studies as well, some of the work that we've done. So, but yeah, always happy to carry conversation with whoever's interested. So hopefully, people found it interesting. But yeah, I'd love to.
I'm sure they will, and I'm sure they'll find the episode interesting too. Thank you very much, and all the best to you. Okay, so thank you everyone. Today was a fantastic episode. Please join us again on our next episode. As you know, we go live at least once or twice a week, and new episodes are being generated all the time. And we're bringing absolutely brilliant guests, magnificent careers that they've had, and still on their journeys to become bigger and better as they go. But for me, 100 Days and Beyond stays a platform for those unsung heroes that work in the background and make things happen. And especially for firms like private equity and any firms that do acquisitions or M&A type work, this is the right platform for you to find the right kind of skills and the right kind of information that you might be seeking. Thank you very much for joining us, and Harrison, all the best, and we'll speak to you at some stage in the future. Goodbye, everyone. Okay, let me just cut there and switch off the recording.